Here to discuss Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware. He is on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Senator, in addition to being on the committee, you're close to President Biden. How is his decision-making process going to work as he considers all the factors, expertise, rulings, judicial temperament, potential Republican Senate support, and more?
Well, Jake, as someone who served 36 years here in the Senate and who chaired the Senate Judiciary Committee, including through a number of important confirmations of Supreme Court justices, I would expect that our president would take his time to review the judicial writings, to interview individual nominees or candidates to be nominated, to balance their temperament, their intellect, their character, their experience. But I am also confident that he is well aware of the urgency of the moment and will deliver a nominee to our committee before the end of the month. And this is the shortest month of the year.
How important is it that he get Senate Republican votes?
I think it would be desirable. It strengthens the legitimacy of our confirmations when we have bipartisan votes, but it's not essential. I think President Biden is determined here to once again nominate someone who has a great educational background, significant experience at the bench and bar, and someone who fits with the priorities and values that he reflected when he ran for president. I think he'll balance that well, and I'm hopeful that Republicans will recognize in his nominees someone who belongs on the Supreme Court and someone who would be an historic pick.
Some of your Republican colleagues have criticized President Biden's pledge during the campaign in 2000 to nominate a black woman, one of the most recent being Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. Take a listen.
Democrats are so casually racist that they'll make that promise, and not only that, it ends up being insulting to African American women. There are black women who are very talented jurists who may well be the appropriate nominee, but when Biden starts out by saying he has a quota system, he diminishes the achievements of those African American women.
Senator Cruz is on the Judiciary Committee with you. What's your response to that?
Well, I think when President Reagan announced that he intended to nominate a woman to the Supreme Court, I suspect that then Republican senators did not say similar things about how this was disrespectful to American women. Ultimately, Sandra Day O'Connor, his nominee, who was confirmed and served for a long time on the Supreme Court, was one of the most respected and successful jurists in the modern Supreme Court history. I think, frankly, when President Trump announced that he would fill the last of the vacancies he got to fill with a woman and filled that vacancy with Amy Coney Barrett, I don't think we heard complaints from my Republican colleagues then either. I think it is appropriate for President Biden to say that he desires a Supreme Court that reflects the full diversity of our nation. He recognizes that we're at a stage where there are many highly qualified, well-experienced candidates from among whom he can choose. And I think we should be celebrating that moment and recognizing that this is a chance for President Biden to make history rather than throwing rocks at his nomination process or his campaign commitment based out of an outdated playbook.
A few days before Cruz's comments, we heard this from Republican Senator Roger Wicker.
The irony is that the Supreme Court is at the very same time hearing cases about this sort of affirmative racial discrimination,
yes,
and while adding someone who is the beneficiary of this sort of quote.
So Wicker and Cruz are calling this affirmative action and quotas. Senator Cruz, in fact, saying that Democrats rallying behind the idea of picking a black woman for this nomination are casually racist. I mean, what's your response?
Well, Jake, frankly, rather than responding to everything said by a colleague that I disagree strongly with, I'd prefer to focus on the historic moment that's in front of us. There are a number of judges, currently serving judges at the state Supreme Court level, district court level, federal circuit court level, whose educational backgrounds are unparalleled, whose experience as judges, whose experience as clerking would stand up to any other currently serving member of the Supreme Court and would certainly compare very favorably with the nominees of the previous administration. Let's look at the last year for a moment, Jake. President Biden nominated a wide range of highly skilled, competent, capable jurists, and we in the Judiciary Committee have filled vacancies on the district court and the circuit court with these candidates, with these nominees. I expect we'll be doing that again. If you take a look in detail at the experience, the education, the life story of just one of the potential nominees, and I'm talking about D.C. Circuit Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson, it's impressive. It's beyond impressive. Any law firm in America, any district court in America, any practitioner of the law in America would respect and be honored to have her as a colleague, whether on the bench or at the bar.
Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware, thank you so much.